So if you're a donor and you need to take time off work, but you're going to lose wage and you can't afford to do that, there are actually programs out there to help you.
Hello, and welcome to the Hi-Fi Health News Podcast. I'm Erica Grotto. Last year, more than 48,000 organ transplants were performed in the United States, with about 7,000 of those organs coming from living donors. Recently, I spoke with Dr. Benjamin Filosof, a surgical director at Johns Hopkins, about what becoming a living donor means and what the cost could be. Dr. Filosof, I didn't know until a family member needed a liver transplant that can actually be a living donation. What other organs qualify for a living donation?
The two major organs that we can donate with living donors are kidney and liver. There are some instances where people donate part of their lungs and part of their pancreases, but I think for the most part, these are not really done in the mainstream. The kidney donation is, living kidney donation is actually a significant part of organ donation in general for kidneys. And liver donation is the living liver donation is a smaller percentage, but still very important.
I read that kidney donation seems to be far and away the most common. Is that right?
In the United States last year, in 2024, there were about, I would say 21,000 plus or minus kidney transplants that were performed. Out of those, about 23% of those transplants were from living donors. So it's a significant portion of the transplants yearly that are done from living donors. And we could do that because we don't need two kidneys. We could live a normal life with one kidney. And so donating one kidney has no really long-term consequences for the donors.
I read that there are more than 100,000 people in the United States awaiting an organ transplant, and almost 90,000 of those are awaiting kidneys. So it certainly seems to be a much needed organ, right?
Yeah, there are more people with kidney disease than there are with liver disease or lung disease or heart disease that require transplant for that matter. So if you look at the snapshot of the waiting list, and I did that not too long ago, in 2024, at the end of 2024, there were about 98,000 people on the list. So clearly we have a much bigger need than we have the number of transplants that we could get from deceased donors. And that's why living donor is important, because it get people off the list, it could get them off dialysis, and basically improves their survival by getting them off dialysis, because that's really life-saving transplant. With livers, it's a little less. With livers, the waiting list is probably about 10,000 currently, and but there are also fewer liver transplants that are done. Only about, I would say, 6,000 to 10,000 liver transplants are done every year. So we have a few number of transplants, so we still have a need. We don't have dialysis for liver, so if patients don't get a transplant, they can die, and the mortality is actually quite high. It's about 10%. So we try to mitigate that with living donors.
So if someone becomes a donor, how is their part of the organ transplant paid for?
Living donor transplants are paid for by the recipient's insurance usually. And that's actually true whether there's a cost to deceased donors as well, and that cost is incorporated into the insurance from the recipient.
Does that include any kind of before care and after care? I'm not sure what kind of preparation, if any, goes into a donation like this.
Usually includes the immediate post-care. So obviously all the pre-testing for the donors, and we do extensive testing to make sure the donors are healthy and have healthy organs. The testing is all covered by the recipient's insurance. The cost of the transplant and the cost of the donation is covered by the recipient's insurance, and the aftercare to a certain period is also covered by recipient insurance. Now, long-term care is not necessarily covered by the recipient insurance, and that's where it could get tricky. And that's something that we have to inform the recipients and the donors that there may be an issue with long-term care if it's related to the donor surgery.
So any complications or whatnot that might crop up later, or
Yeah, for the most part, complications, if they're related to the surgery itself, would be covered. Many medical institutions cover that and will eat the cost, even though it may not be covered by the insurance company. So the insurance companies may deny the care if it's, let's say, a hernia that develops from the incision 3 years later. The hernia may say, no, this is related to the donor, we're not going to cover it. So the institution, many of the institutions that perform living donation will cover this cost of that, knowing that this is not, the fault of the donor and should be covered. Now, if the donor develops something else unrelated, that's separate. But if it's related, if we know for sure it's related to the donor surgery, then usually the institution will cover if the insurance companies don't cover it.
what about other costs for the living donor besides hospital care and the actual procedure?
I mean, the expense is not just the medical expenses. There are a lot of, there's a lot of talk and there are a lot of papers published on out-of-pocket expenses of donors that are not necessarily calculated, medically. For example, travel costs, lost wages. When donors take time off from work, what is the financial burden for that? And there are programs out there that are available to the vast majority of people who donate, regardless of wealth. So if you're a donor and you need to take time off work, but you're going to lose wage and you can't afford to do that, there are actually programs out there that help you. And there's a program from the National Kidney Registry called Donor Shield. That's for kidney donors. That helps them with out-of-pocket costs for donation, like hotels, travel, things like that. And then there's also the National Living Donor Assistance Program that is run by our United Network of Organ Sharing. It's called UNOS, which is a little bit like the government for transplant. And they have a program that actually helps donors financially. I would say with both those programs, the vast majority of the donors should be able to cover their out-of-pocket costs for organ donation.
I have an interesting anecdote to share before we go. As I was researching this episode, I reached out to a friend from college who donated a kidney about 6 years ago to learn about her experience. She told me the recipient in her case had had 2 previous kidney transplants, which presented some challenges with ensuring that hers would be a match. Because what I hadn't known was that when someone receives a kidney transplant, the old kidneys are typically left in the body. So this recipient had 4 kidneys in the lower abdomen. Both recipient and donor are doing great today. That's it for us this week. I'm Erica Grotto for Hi-Fi Health News. Thanks for watching.